Hi everyone, we're going to get going in a minute or two. Hello, how are you today? Thank you for joining me. It's nice to be with you. Gosh, a lot has happened in this last week. All kinds of things, both in our country, but then also just for us as the clergy team. We spent the last few days, Monday and Wednesday, filming our high holiday services. So everything except Rosh Hashanah Day 2 is done. So it's kind of weird in the middle of August to be done with high holidays and to have shot it like a TV show where there are cuts in between scenes, so to speak, whether that's a prayer or an introduction to a prayer or one of the songs or a fascinating process. I mean, there we were in our empty, gorgeous, huge sanctuary with a camera crew because we have a congregant who is generous with his time and his resources, and he brought his camera crew since he's a producer. So I think we had 5 or 6 cameras. There was even a drone at certain points that got some shots, and it was a wonderful experience and also very weird. So even today, I'm both tired. The day after Yom Kippur is always very exhausting for those of us who lead services. And yesterday, we filmed the end of Rosh Hashanah Day, and then Kol Nidre, Yom Kippur Day, and then Yisker and Ne'ilah. So it was a very long day, and it was it was an experience. So it feels like the day after Yom Kippur. So I'm a little tired. I might be a little off, so I apologize in advance for that. But also, besides just the physicality of the day, I think I'm also really struggling with the spirituality of what it means to go through high holidays the way we just went through them. To speak to an empty sanctuary and to do so by trying to imagine that sanctuary filled and to do it, I'm used to the rhythm, as are you, I'm sure, that holidays and Jewish experiences start in the evening. And so I've always been in the routine that the evening begins, you have the Erev service, I come home, I don't sleep so well, and then I get up the next morning and I go back to synagogue and spend the day. And so it's a different rhythm to actually start the process in the morning and go through that. And so I think I have a deeper appreciation. Last week we talked about Shabbat in this class, a deeper appreciation for the rhythm that our tradition has created with evening into morning. Things begin in, you go to sleep in the middle of our holidays, right? Unlike other holidays, Christian holidays or secular holidays, where it starts in the morning when you wake up and goes until you go to sleep. Here we've created this rhythm where you begin an experience, a meaningful experience in the evening, then you rest and you go to sleep, and then you continue that experience the next day. And so I don't think I had really thought about that and appreciated that enough until I just went through this filming of the high holidays in August. So anyway, that's a little bit of a ramble of where I'm at. And in a way, it's linked to the story that we're going to talk about today, because today's story is about what does it mean to be away and to return. And so I guess part of me is both relieved that high holidays are over, because usually the next month or so would be a time of fraught discussion and planning and contemplation and writing, and all of that is now done. So that's kind of weird. But there's also, I think, a yearning for returning to the way it should be, which is everyone gathered together at the appropriate time for all of us to be together. So I hope next year's high holidays can be in that vein as opposed to what we just experienced. So I'll be very curious for those of you who do end up tuning into our high holidays, what you think of them, and the beauty this year of us being able to experience high holidays from all kinds of communities. So enough of that. All right, let's get into it. I want to make this teaching in honor of two people. One is Adin Steinsaltz. Adin Steinsaltz, who was a rabbi and a scholar who passed away last Friday, really was the person responsible for making Talmud accessible. He was the one who took the entire Talmud, starting in the 60s and finishing in the 2000s, spent his time translating the entire Talmud into modern Hebrew with vocalization. If you look at a Talmud text, a traditional Talmud text, much of it is in Aramaic. There aren't vowels, and so he took this entire text and he added vowels. He made it into modern Hebrew so that modern Hebrew speakers, and then it was also, by the way, translated. Some of the volumes have been translated into English. If you go to the Steinsaltz Talmud, if you get one of those, and he made it accessible. He added commentary to the entire Talmud. So really, no one since Rashi really has done such a deep dive into creating a commentary and making text accessible to the Jewish people and the non-Jewish community as well. So really a leader in our community. And then it's my wife's birthday today, so I'm in honor of her and her birthday. This teaching is for her. Even though the content, as you see, is not supposed to be a reference to our own experience. It's not about that, but there is this tradition that you offer a teaching in honor of someone else. So I'm thinking about my wife today. Okay, so let's get to it. As we always do, we're going to begin with the blessing for engaging in the study of Torah. As you remember, you have below Q&A, chat, and the opportunity to virtually raise your hand. So once we go through this text and I give some ideas, then of course I'm going to open it up to all of you, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts as well today. Okay, so we will begin with the prayer for engaging in the study of Torah, so feel free to join with me. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidishanu b'mitzvotah v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praised are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who commands us to engage in the study of Torah. Amen. Okay, let's get to it. Short story, but this story, I brought an addendum to it, which is a reference. There's a reference to a character in the story that we're looking at from the Talmud, and the reference is based on a midrash, so a rabbinic story, so to speak. So I included that on the second page. So what I want us to do, we're going to read through the story once, then we're going to read the postscript to give a little bit of context, and then we'll go back and go through it, and then I'm curious what you have to say. So again, the theme that I took from this is this idea of returning home. Here's a scholar, he's returning home. What does it mean when you've gone out, and not just physically, but when you've gone out to try and accomplish something? What does it mean to come back and bring back what you've learned or what you haven't learned from that experience? And what is the value? What is the story supposed to be teaching us about what it means to go out and trying to accomplish something, and what happens either when you return or what you miss when you go out to try and express yourself or learn something new or go on an adventure? What are the repercussions of that? And what is the lesson? What is our text trying to teach us with this? Okay, so let's go through it. Nope, sorry about that. Wrong one. Sometimes that happens. Okay, here we go. From Ketubot. Rabbi Chama bar Bisa went away from home and spent 12 years at the house of study. When he returned, he said, "I will not act as did Ben Hakinai." He therefore entered the local house of study and sent word to his house. Meanwhile, his son, Rabbi Oshaya, entered and sat down before him. Rav Oshaya addressed to him a question concerning the law. He saw how well versed he was in his studies. He became very depressed. He said to himself, "Had I been here, I also could have had such a child." He entered his house. His son came after him. Rav Chama rose before him, thinking that he wished to ask him some further legal questions. His wife said to him, "What kind of man stands up before his son?" End of story. That's it. That's the whole thing. Okay? So we have a few characters here. We have Rav Chama, main character. We have Ben Hakinai, who we're going to read about in a minute. We have Rabbi Oshaya, his son. And then we have down here, we have his wife. Okay? Those are the various characters. So I think we learn a lesson from all of them. So let's go and learn a little bit more about this Ben Hakinai character so that we understand why does Rav Chama, when he comes back from being away for 12 years, we've read some other stories about people, whether they've been in a cave or gone off to study for a while and then they come home. This is a theme that we find throughout the Talmud. Why does he not want to be like Ben Hakinai? Now, we could read the story and not have that context, but it's nice to have the context, and it's another story, so we might as well look at it. So let's look at that and find out first what Rav Chama does not want to be like, and then let's see if he succeeds or not. Okay? So, background on Ben Hakinai. This is from Breshit Rabbah 95. Breshit Rabbah, there's a Rabbah, there's a Shmot Rabbah, there's Vayikra Rabbah. These are all, for all 5 books of the Torah, there are these sets of midrashim. And there are, of course, lots of other midrashim as well, but these are very well known. So this comes from Breshit, Genesis Rabbah, section 95. Rav Hanina ben Hakinai and Rabbi Simeon Bar Yochai went to study Torah at Rabbi Akiva's college at Bnei Brak and stayed there for 13 years. Rabbi Simeon Bar Yochai used to send home for news and knew what was happening at his house. Rav Hanina did not send and did not know what was happening at his house. His wife sent him word and told him, "Your daughter is marriageable, come and get her married." He said nothing to his master. Nevertheless, Rabbi Akiva saw it by means of the Holy Spirit and said to him, "If anyone has a marriageable daughter, he may go and get her married." Rav Hanina understood what he meant. So he rose, took leave, and went. He sought to enter into his house, but found its appearance had been changed, and so did not recognize it. What did he do? He went and sat down at the place where the women drew water, and heard the voices of the little girls saying, "Daughter of Hanina, fill your vessel and go." So what did he do? He followed her until she entered his house. He went in after her suddenly. No sooner did his wife see him than her soul departed. Said he to God, "Sovereign of the universe, is that the reward of this poor woman after 13 years of waiting?" Thereupon her soul returned to her body. Okay, so we have the story. Now we're just going to break this one down briefly because I want to spend the majority of our time focusing on the actual story from the Talmud itself. But this is what Rabbi Bar Bisa, or Rav Chama, as he's referred to in our first story, what he does not want to be like. He does not want to be the main character of this story. So just to review, Rav Hanina, who's the main character in this story, he, like Rav Chama in our story, went away for 13 years to study, which was traditional. A lot of the times these Torah scholars would go off and learn from a greater scholar in some other city and spend significant time there. But the difference between the two characters here, we have 2 scholars who go to Rabbi Akiva's study hall, Rabbi Hanina and Rabbi Simeon. Now, Rav Simeon did what you would hope and expect from a good father, husband, partner, and he used to send home news, and he would get updates from his family, and he kept in touch with what was going on at home. Rav Hanina did not do that. He was basically in the dark for this whole time. And we can imagine he was just so focused on his study. But at one point, his wife sent word and said, "Now your daughter is marriageable. Come and get her married. She's finally grown up, and it's time for her to be married and to start this next stage of her life." But he didn't say anything. Right? That was the opening where he could have gone to Rabbi Akiva and said, as much as I love studying here, I need to go home and be with my family. However, he didn't say anything. Rabbi Akiva somehow knew what happened. It says here, according to the Holy Spirit. So he knew that Hanina's wife had reached out to him and said, your daughter is ready to get married. So Rabbi Akiva just put out there for everyone, if anyone has a marriageable daughter, you are free to go about getting her married. You can leave. In other words, giving permission to anyone, even though really he was speaking directly to Hanina. We know this strategy. Sometimes we've used this strategy ourselves. And Rabbi Hanina understood what this meant, so he went home. And he went to his house, but his house looked different. He'd been gone for 13 years, so he didn't recognize it. So he didn't really know where he lived and where he was. So what did he do? He went to the place where all the women drew water. So he went to the well. So you can imagine it's kind of gossip central. I know that's sexist, but I think that's the message of the story, was that all the women came together in this place, and that's where they shared gossip and news, and where you could really understand what was going on in people's lives. So that's where he goes. And he overhears someone calling out, daughter of Hanina, so that clearly that's his daughter. So he follows that girl home. He doesn't even know her. He doesn't even recognize her, and she clearly doesn't recognize him. And he goes and he enters the house. Suddenly, that kind of would be jarring. And his wife sees him, and she dies. And so then he calls out to God, God, is this the reward for this poor woman who's waited 13 years? And miraculously, she returns to life. Okay, and that's how the story ends. The story ends of the story of Rav Hanina, that his wife's soul is restored. Okay, so I want you to think about what's happening in this story. This is not what Rav Chama wants to experience, or the type of experience he wants to have when he gets home. He does not want to be anonymous to his family. He doesn't want to cause his wife to die. He doesn't want to have all the different elements that we just saw in this midrash about this rabbi who was so cut off from his family that he really didn't know what was going on and caused pain to his family when he returned. Okay, so that's what's lingering on Rav Chama's on his mind right now. So you can imagine for our own lives this idea of when you want to go out or when you want to experience something and you want to work so hard to make sure you don't fall into the trap of someone else that went down a possible similar path, had a similar experience, and yet ended up in a place that wasn't the way you wanted it to end up. I can't think of an actual tangible example at the moment, but the idea here is that if you are on a similar trajectory as someone else and they are a little ahead of you, so to speak, and you've seen their pitfalls, you think about how you don't want to make those same mistakes. You want to be successful. In both of these cases, these are men who want to be successful. They want to, and they're defining their success based on their ability to learn and how much learning they do. And we all have our own definitions of success. But success at its core requires us to take a journey, so to speak. It requires us to engage in being vulnerable. You can't really have success without some level of vulnerability. And in both of these rabbis' cases, the vulnerability is them being away from their family on their own and basically creating another identity. And what does it mean when you have two identities, and how can those identities merge together? Is it possible to do that? And so that's what they're struggling with here. So now let's go back to the story from the Talmud itself and see if this gives us any context, and if it changes or illuminates anything for you in terms of Rav Chama, and does he succeed at being different from this character? Is he different from Rabbi Hanina from the midrash we just read, or does he end up in the same place? What do you think? Okay, so let's go back to the story. Okay, Rav Chama, he went away from home, spent 12 years at the house of study. We don't know the details of that. We just know he went away for a long time. We don't know if he kept in touch with his family or not, but we can assume he didn't keep in great touch with them. But when he returned after these 12 years, he already says, I do not want to be like that other person. I assume that I was successful in my 12 years of study. I have just been studying and honing a skill set for a significant amount of time. But I don't want the end result of that study and that process of trying to find success to have me end up in the same place as this other guy. So therefore, he entered the house of study and sent word to his house. So he doesn't go to the well. He goes to the house of study. Why does he go to the house of study? Well, there could be a variety of reasons. Is he going there because, again, he is so connected to this idea of study and success that already when he gets home, he's not even able to differentiate the type of life he was living before with this new home. He's now back at his home, but yet he can't really let go of what he's been completely focused on for the last 12 years. So think about in your own life if there's ever been this moment where you have tried to transition away from something. Now, it could be a job, it could be a career, or it could just be a mindset that you've been focused on a certain way of seeing something for a long time, and you're telling yourself, I want to snap out of that. I want to see things a little differently when it comes to this issue. But yet, it's really not that easy to just snap out of something and take a different path. And here, I think what we're learning is that even when we are trying to make a shift and when we're returning home or when we're trying to return back to what we think is our core value system, that it can be very challenging to let go of what you just were immersed in for a long time. That there's a warning in the fact that he goes back to the house of study that says, beware, or at least give yourself some time to re-immerse yourself in a new lifestyle. Okay? He sent word to his house. Meanwhile, his son, Rabbi Oshaya, entered and sat down before him. Now, he doesn't know it's his son. We know because the narrator is telling us that this person is his son. And this rabbi comes and is, by the way, a well-known rabbi in other Talmudic stories. And Rabbi Oshaya addressed to him a question concerning the law. So he doesn't know who this man is, but he asks a question, how he saw how well-versed he was in his studies. So now his father, not sure if this is really his son or not, but we can assume that it's not really he doesn't know it's his son, asks him a question that really shows that Rabbi Oshaya is a learned man. That here, this father who doesn't know that this is his son is coming back, is entering into the same environment he was in for 12 years in some other place. Now he's back in his own hometown in this house of study. And this young rabbi, who's very smart, comes up to him and asks him a question, right? And doesn't know who he is. And as a result of being asked this question, Rabbi Chama becomes depressed. So why does he become depressed? I think this is one of the things we can have all kinds of interpretations. I'm curious what your interpretation is here. Is he depressed because he didn't teach his son and he's seeing this man as we have in the next line? He said to himself, had I been here, I also could have had such a child. Is he depressed because he's thinking about what he could have had in his life? Is it that he could have learned in his own town that this young rabbi who grew up here clearly is very learned, and therefore this house of study is pretty good at doing its job of teaching young rabbis to really understand the laws of our tradition? He went away for 12 years, and here he's back and sees that, well, there was something really powerful happening and very successful happening right here in his own town. Is that why he gets depressed? Does he get depressed because he's realizing his own limitations of his studies, that he went away for 12 years to immerse himself in learning, and yet here's this young rabbi who basically he's basically saying knows more than he does, or at least is at the same level as him in terms of intelligence and skill set when it comes to Talmud and Torah, and that he's depressed because he's realizing his own limitations and that he's not the smartest, and that there are certain limitations of just how successful you can be in a certain area. I don't know. Or is there another reason? What else do you think is the reason why he's depressed at this moment? So he said to himself, had I been here, I also could have had such a child. Already he's doing what the Jews did when they were wandering in the desert for 40 years after leaving Egypt. They complained about how life was better back in Egypt. Right here, he's complaining about, well, if I had been here, I could have had a different life. Now he's regretting everything he did. So is this part of his depression? Here he has devoted himself to something, and now he's realizing he devoted himself to the wrong things. Has anyone ever experienced that? Or do you know someone who spent a lot of time or energy or a career doing something because they felt like that was going to lead them to the definition of success, only to realize that that actually isn't success, and that defining their definition up to that point of what success would look like or what was valuable was actually completely wrong. And you can imagine how devastating that can be, to realize that you've been on the wrong path, or you've put the wrong things in front as your priorities instead of something else. Another reason why I wanted us to start playing with these ideas is that we're coming up on the month of Elul starting next week, and then we're leading into the high holidays. So this is the time where we're supposed to be thinking about what is our path? How are we spending our time? What does it mean to go out and try and be successful, however we want to define that? And can we make sure we're not setting ourselves up for down the road, maybe finding out that that is not at all what success is? So he said to himself, okay, we said that. He entered his house. So he comes home and his son came after him. So Rav Chama rose before him, thinking that he wished to ask him some further legal questions. So here we have this idea of him standing up. Now, usually the rabbi would sit and students would come and ask the questions. So here he's standing up either to say, I have nothing more to offer you, so I'm not going to sit as a scholar for you to ask me questions because you know more than I do, or you know as much as I do. Or he's standing up because he's trying to show a sign of respect for this young man who he doesn't know it's his son yet. So either way, he's struggling with his relationship with this person, and this person who he is defining as more successful than himself. And his wife then says to him, "What kind of man stands up before his son?" And that's the only thing she says in this whole thing. She hasn't seen him in 12 years. She hasn't seen him in 12 years. And now he stands up. She knows this is his son. He doesn't necessarily know it's his son. And she chastises him for standing up, as if to say, well, she could be saying, you just spent 12 years away studying, and now you're standing up and you haven't learned as much as you said you were going to learn. In other words, is this her saying, well, why did we just waste 12 years of our lives going after this thing if it really hasn't done what you wanted it to do? If you haven't been successful the way you imagined you were going to be successful, in other words, to be a Rav who can sit there and have students come to them and teach them, and instead you're getting up as if this person who is your son, who is supposed to be someone that you are supposed to teach, that he is teaching you, and that's the end of the story. It's a weird ending here. So there are a lot of different ways we can go with this story. I think what's sitting with me right now is this idea that sometimes you can learn more at staying at home, however you want to define home, than going away. The son who stayed at home this entire time was able to learn more than his father, who went out in search of something that he had idealized in his mind. You know, there's a great rabbinic story about a man who's looking for a treasure, and so he has this dream about a treasure. I love the story. And so he dreams in his mind that there's a treasure buried in a town, a ways away, under a bridge. And so he wakes up in the middle of the night after this vivid dream. He goes into that town, he goes to that bridge, and he starts digging under the bridge. And a soldier or a policeman comes by and says, "What are you doing in the middle of the night, digging this hole under this bridge?" And this man says, "Well, I had this dream that there was a treasure buried here." And the policeman says, "Oh, that's ridiculous. Such dreams. We can't believe in dreams. If you believe in dreams, then I wouldn't be here right now, because I just had a dream last night that there's this poor man who lives in a town next door, and underneath his house is a buried treasure." And so the man realizes, aha, that's my house. So he goes back home, he pulls up the floorboards, and he finds this treasure right underneath his own home. Right? So it's a story that in his mind, he had a dream that he could find treasure and success somewhere out there, when in fact, it was right in his home underneath his feet the entire time. So for me, this is what I'm connecting to. And also, since we're spending a lot more time at home, I've come to the realization more and more, even though I already did appreciate it very much so before COVID-19 and this pandemic, that the true beauty and the true treasures that exist in our lives are found in our homes and the type of home we create. And here we have this man who has left that and is lost. And he's lost because he hasn't been able to find success out there, and he hasn't been able to find success when he gets home because he doesn't have an identity, and his home is not his own. And his wife is chastising him, his son he doesn't know. So in other words, what I take from the story is that then what the rabbis seem to be teaching us is that he is no different than that midrash that we read about Ben Hakinai. That even though his wife doesn't die at the end of this story, that in other words, he has failed. That by going out and then coming back after so long and not really knowing himself and his family, he has failed. And therefore the rabbis teaching us this lesson that going away and being away from home and being away from really what the core of who you are is and what you are trying to establish in your immediate sphere, if you go away from that searching for something else, you are going to get lost and you are going to fail and you're not going to be successful. That again, this harkens back to the concept that we are a home-based tradition. You don't really need to go and be in a synagogue for pretty much any Jewish holiday. Besides Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, Shabbat is a home-based holiday, Passover is a home-based holiday, Hanukkah, we could go through the list, right? The majority of our holidays don't require us to necessarily be in a large community. We have to start at the home. The Shabbat table is supposed to be representative of the sacrificial altar that existed at the time of the temple, right? And we've replaced the altar. Instead of sacrificing animals, we now sacrifice on Friday night the challah, right? It is this idea that what we are doing is we are changing a ritual that was based somewhere else and of course no longer exists, and we're bringing it into our home to the most intimate place besides the bed, the most intimate place in a house, which is the table, which is the dining room table where people eat, where they gather together, ideally to share stories, to share their lives, and of course to share the most substantive thing that we can literally physically put into our body, which is our food, right? It's what gives us energy, and we know that Jews put food at the center of everything, right? Not just with the blessings, but so much centers around our connection to food. This week's Torah portion, for example, has the second set of laws about kashrut that you first find in Leviticus, and now you find it here in Deuteronomy. So all of these things, I think this is a real warning. This is a story that's a warning about what does success look like for you. And how are you bringing that value system of what
person even stayed in the home? I don't think you need to go away from the home. I mean, it's about balance. It's like if I have a home office, okay, and I realize that I've been working so hard, and now that I can't do the assessments for the kids at school, actually I'm really happy because now I have more time to listen to you, to do my art and to do things. And I have more balance in my life. And I realized sometimes I have this beautiful pool area, beautiful yard, and I wouldn't even see the light of day and I was in my own home, okay? And so I think it's about balance and about being able to live in the present and enjoy things. You have to give up some things. You can't have it all. But I don't think, you could be in your own home. A person can be in their own home and really miss the essence of their kids growing up or their partner. So you can be within your own head and not really be present. So,
Yes.
Yeah, I like your stories.
Yeah. Thank you, Abby. Yeah, that's a great point. And I think now, I have my own home office. Many of us who even weren't working from home before, now that blending of work and home has literally come together in one. And how do you do that? How do you make sure that, unlike the rabbis in this story who leave and go to work and go to learn somewhere else, now that's all collapsed on itself, and we now have to work even harder to figure out how does success in your professional world, for those of you who are listening who still are working, and even those who are not getting a paycheck but who are volunteering or working in all the other ways that you can be defining work. How are you making sure that you are balancing that out, as Abby says, that you can find a way to separate that out, and at the same time, can you make sure that they align with one another? Because I think another thing that's this story is supposed to be teaching us is, if you are going out to study Torah, but you have missed the point of the values of Torah, which is family and connection and being able to understand relationships, that this man clearly didn't learn that from 12 years of study. That if you're not living out your value system both at work and at home, or if you are making sure that you are not aligning the two, so that as you navigate from literally one room of your house to the other, or one time of day to the other in your own home, that there is some way in which they work and blend together in a positive, healthy way. And how can you do that? And, for me, we got a dog during the pandemic early on, so I've figured out my own ways. In the morning and at night, I take that dog for a walk, and I can listen to a podcast or music or call someone and just have my own space. Or sometimes, as Abby was mentioning, her backyard, sometimes I just go at night into the backyard, I sit on the chair and I read. I'm really into the Daniel Silva books these days. So I sit and read for a little while. And that is one tiny way in which I'm just doing something different. So you bring up a really, really good point, Abby. Thank you. Hi, Jeff. Go ahead, Jeff.
Rabbi, sorry, I had to unmute.
No problem.
These two stories really, for me, are points of abject failure of purpose. And as you just voiced, this man lost the essence of the learning of Torah, which is the value of Shabbat, staying home and teaching your family and being immersed in family. And for a personal note, having studied for 17 years before I opened my office with surgical training, et cetera, those years I limited, unfortunately, the exposure to my children. And that sense of time lost, experiential loss, is a high price to pay, especially when this fellow, the rabbis in their study halls, miss the entire point and value of the Torah learning and teaching in your home. And their egos got in the way. It's a story of failed ego. And it should be looked on as a warning of what not to do.
Great. Yes, Jeff, I completely agree. And I hope you're finding your own way through navigating those 17 years of not having the time. That the nice thing about realizing that is the opportunity of tshuva in the deepest sense, which is a return to what really matters to us, and being given this opportunity, not just once a year, because tshuva is something we are supposed to be going through and returning to ourselves and our core on a regular basis. And this, as Jeff just pointed out, is a story of failure. And we're coming up on a time where we're heightened spiritually supposed to be recognizing the things where we've fallen short, and how are we going to address them? How are we going to take initiative in changing them? Not just being defeated like the rabbi in the story who was just depressed and who had given up. Right? He didn't have to give up on his son. He didn't have to give up on the idea of success. He could have turned this around. And maybe if we were to write the next chapter of the story about his response after his wife says, "So you stand up before your son," well, maybe he could go through a whole process of tshuva and a creative. You could imagine a creative exercise of your own midrash of what are the different pathways this man could take, and how we do still have that choice. That built into these stories is the opportunity that even if you've been going down that path, as soon as you realize that something is a little off, our tradition says you have ownership over being able to change that trajectory. Don't wait for God. Don't wait for other people. Take the initiative, as hard as it may be, to know that you can change that. And that is supposed to be a freeing thing, as much as it can feel like a burden. It's a real gift that our tradition gives to us through the concept of teshuvah. Okay, Merle. Hi, Merle.
Hi. So I'm thinking that the lesson here is that this has forced us to slow down, but to slow down in a good way, in a way that we're appreciating what we have more and what we can do at home, and that we don't have to rush out to do it. There are things that we can do without leaving home, and I think it's redefined for a lot of people. For those of us who can be with family that are near us, that it's redefined family time. We're not all rushing to get someplace because we can't go someplace, and that we can do it. Our granddaughters did dance competitions and karate competitions on Zoom, but we could all be there, whereas now, you're not allowed in a studio. And so I think it redefined a lot of what we are all capable of doing and how to do it, and that we're not all rushing around, which is not healthy for us anymore.
Yep. Great. Thank you, Merle. Yes, and the mere fact that there are people I know who study in this class who don't live in proximity of my home or live in Los Angeles, and the fact that we have new opportunities of building new community, or the fact that my parents speak to my girls on FaceTime every Saturday morning. It's like part of the Shabbat tradition now on Saturday mornings where they FaceTime. And so that there are ways in which you can still be connected and still define the home. And now we don't even have to define the home purely in the physical footprint of our home. That now we can redefine home to be more expansive. And therefore, we have the capability of bringing a value system that we have, for the most part, up until now, limited to a physical footprint of a home. And we can expand that out as we redefine and expand our definition of who is in our home, and how we can virtually be connecting to people and creating a home environment or home atmosphere that goes beyond our physical home. And if we can keep working on that and figuring out strategies of expanding what matters to us out more, that would be really powerful, I think. Sukasa. Hi, Sukasa.
Mute. Okay. I was kind of struck when you read the midrash. You think, oh, he doesn't want to be like Rabbi Hanina because he's writing home, he's staying in touch, and so forth. But what struck me was they say if you say the Shema and you don't really feel it, you don't really engage in prayer, it's useless and it doesn't matter. And you get the feeling that he's writing home, but he really didn't know what was going on at home. He didn't know about his son to the point where he didn't even recognize him when he saw him.
Yeah, great. Yes, this idea of what does it mean to be connected to home, and writing home but not really knowing what that is. Yes, yeah. Thank you. Okay, Carol. Hi, Carol. Want to unmute? Oh, maybe we'll come back to Carol. Okay. Susan. Hi, Susan. Oh, Carol, wait, hold on, Susan. Carol, you're unmuted now. Go ahead.
I felt that he was hypocritical in that he went to study away from home, and it says that for 12 years he didn't make any real contact. That, to me, is against all of our rules of being a family. He was not interested in his family. And I have found over my life experience that I have met some very religious people who have been very hypocritical and antagonistic towards other people. So I feel that part of the lesson is you have to be more involved in your own personal situation.
Yeah, Great. Yes, and I think also that I think it is a self-critique that the rabbis are offering themselves about this idea of hypocrisy between the definition of study of Torah and how you live it out. And are you getting caught in the wrong definition where you think that just studying something counts for success, but actually when it comes to Torah, we're not studying it is just the first part. Once we study it and we start to struggle with it and start to understand it, then it's about how we actually live out that Torah. How do we spread the messages of Torah in our lives and in our actions? So don't be caught, as I think, Carol, you're seeming to suggest, as this story seems to also be suggesting, don't get caught in a very narrow definition or assume that you're not being hypocritical if you're only doing one piece and you fail the real important piece, which is how you live that out. And I think that it can expand to all kinds of things in our lives, and I think it goes back to practice what you preach or practice what you learn and make sure that you are doing that. And if you're not, you're missing the point. Then you actually failed at what you thought you were learning or teaching because you're not living it out. We have to act, and it's how we act, it's how we treat each other, it's how we treat ourselves that really at the end of the day is the barometer for how much we actually have learned in our life. So I think it's a nice way to reflect on what has been your own education, not just in the classroom and intellectually, but life education. And are you living those messages of what you have learned through your life? Are you doing that right now? Do you feel like there's a certain part of your life that you are not living up to, that's been dormant, that is a key piece of your learning, and yet you haven't really explored it recently? And I think this is a nice time of year for us to be thinking about that and maybe getting back in touch with those pieces of life lessons and learning that we've experienced. And how can we make sure that we are living that out for ourselves and maybe articulating that to our family members or the next generation, that we're given that opportunity right now. So thank you, Carol. Susan. Hi, Susan.
Unmute.
Yes.
Great story, and I agree with all that's been said. You might also look at it as a metaphor too of not only the Torah and living it out, but of careerism, where you might be near, but emotionally distant and psychologically distant from your family. So, I think it's a caveat, a warning for that. I was struck also about, personally, leaving family, taking a husband and wife and going, living in another area. Parents lose their adult children, we lose relationships with family, and that has been a big thing for careerism. And maybe it's unavoidable until now with the silver lining business. And I never wanted to leave my family for my husband's career opportunities, and it turns out he had better opportunities staying where we were, and we had family, parents, and siblings growing up. And then another thing that was strange here was the women, the wives. They raised the family. And the husbands were different. And I think of feminism and careerism, where women are judged by what careers they have. I remember to say this briefly, when I was staying home with my children and going to graduate school, people would ask, do you work? And I'd say, yes, I'm raising my children. And they said, well, that's not work, I mean real work. So that has been the denigration of women caring for families is one, I think, harmful aspect of our careerist look in feminism. And the women here, I must applaud them for staying at home and taking care of the kids when the men went away to be big shot Talmudists.
Yes, great, all excellent. Thank you. Those were all great points. Especially, yes, I can resonate with all of them as much as I can for the pieces about women. but yes, and careerism and going away. My mom actually has her hand raised. Speaking of being away from children, I mean, my mom is in the Bay Area and I'm here in Los Angeles. So yes, and partly that is due to career. So really interesting stuff. Yeah, go ahead, Mom.
Okay, thank you, Joel. Great to be with you. This is really interesting. First of all, just a note. I noticed that it's from ketubot. So is this the part of the Talmud that relates to ketubas?
Yes.
Okay, so it's about marriage. So, this whole construct about marriage. And what I was thinking in listening to the story and some of the comments is that, in a life, we have multiple homes. We many of us move, we live in different parts of the country, we may live in different countries. And the exposure to how others have homes informs the way we live in our own. So I think that, what part of what this teaching is like, it's not just the being home, it's that when we all have to leave home for different reasons, we make different homes, different places in different ways, whether it's work or literally the home, but it's about how we do that. And I'm connecting it a lot to the notion of the tabernacle. We have a portable religion. We take the Torah with us. We take the Ark with us. We don't have the temple anymore. So this notion of what do we hold within us and how do we learn from the experiences of living in different homes ourselves and being with others who live very differently from the way we do can really enrich our lives.
Great. Yes. Thank you. As a family who has lived in different homes in different countries, yes, I obviously can relate to that. But I think also, yes, that, now we have a slight window, unless you have a virtual background like I do right now. We do have this virtual and small windows into other people's homes. There was some great articles about how people study the books and people's backgrounds when they're on CNN, or you see who's, when there are people who are talking and what is it behind them, and how does their home represent, or how are they articulating what matters to them through this virtual window, which is a really interesting thing that we are now facing in this world, because people now have an opportunity or a challenge of how you want to represent what you are showing the world, and what does that mean, and what are you trying to teach them through that. It's I think it's fascinating. But yes, and how, as this story seems to indicate, are you bringing home the learning that you brought from wherever your home is now? Are you bringing those past homes with you and the lessons you learned from them? Clearly in this story, that the rabbi failed to take the lessons of the house of study, literally Beit Midrash, the house of study where he lived in that home for 12 years. There was a failure of being able to bring that into his new, what was technically his old home, but what it was becoming his new home back in his town. So how do we make sure that the homes, the physical homes, and also the emotional and spiritual homes that we've lived in throughout our lives, can we make sure, just as my mom mentioned, the tabernacle came with us? How do we make sure we bring the Torah, the teaching, literally Torah means teaching, how do we make sure we are bringing those teachings with us and planting them? Just as we, put that mezuzah on the door of a new home to symbolize the fact that this is a Jewish home, but this is a home where we have certain values and ways in which we want to express ourselves. Can we make sure that mezuzah is also representative, and within it is not just the Shema and Ve'ahavta, but within it is all the wisdom that we have brought from all our other homes and placed on the door to say, I remember that when I walk through this door and into this house, I am bringing with me a whole set of memories and lessons from other homes into this space. So thank you. Okay. I think, Abby, you have one more thing you want to say?
I had one more comment. I also thought about the concept of time, because, time goes by so quickly. In 12 years studying, if you had children, children grow up. It's time just sort of, like they say, time flies. And I was talking to my son and grandson. And I asked my grandson how old he thought I was, and he thought I was 5 because he's 3. And I told my son how old I am because, I can say it's 67. And you know what? It goes by so quickly. You don't think about that time. And I think so, making use of your time, and, it's just saying things you may want to say. And I don't know. I just thought of that, just the concept of time here and how fast it goes, and how you. So that's my other comment.
Yes, right. This man went away, and the story seems to almost be suggesting he wasted 12 years, because what really mattered is what he missed, and that how time flies, and how much we can miss in a span of time. And 12 years can feel like, I have a 12-year-old daughter. I think about my life before her. I can barely remember that life. She's becoming bat mitzvah in December, which is mind-blowing in itself. But to think about what has happened over the course of 12 or 13 years in my own life, right? And just imagine, where were you 12 years ago, right? And think about all the things and all the lessons that you have learned, and all the things, good and bad, that you have experienced in the last 12 years. That's an incredible amount of time. We're blessed that we are still here, and we have a responsibility, I think, to be really thinking about what is that Torah that we've learned from those experiences, and how do we make sure we don't forget, right? And I should try and remember what my life was like before those 12 years, and how can I re-engage with the lessons I learned then, not just as a parent, but before I was a parent. Esther asks a couple questions. They're more rhetorical, so I don't know if I'll necessarily answer them all, but she asked some good questions of, wasn't going away to study what men did at that time and what was expected of them? Yes, in many cases. Not all, though. I see this as a commentary on how social values change and how we can deal with those changes, as well as what does it take to challenge the expectations society and culture put on us. Great. That maybe this is also a lesson that the rabbis are trying to teach us, that yes, even if most people go away to study, is that necessarily the best thing we should do? Just because everyone is graduating college and going off to law school because that's what people are doing, does that mean that's what you should do? I know I have some friends who took that path, aren't so thrilled to be lawyers, but didn't really know what they wanted to do as they were graduating college. And there was almost this underlying pressure to go to a grad school, and that law school was a way to go. So they did it. And now some of them are in careers where they're miserable. Right. So yes, I think in many ways, this is another opportunity for us to think about what are the expectations also that Susan raised about women and the role of women, as Esther is bringing up as well. And how do we start to shift that? And what does it mean for a society to shift expectations of roles and responsibilities? So anyway, so much. Thank you for joining me, for all your wonderful comments and questions and interpretations of this story. Just goes to show one short story can offer an amazing amount of room for us to learn about ourselves, learn about each other, and learn about our traditions. So wishing you an early Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for joining me. We'll plan to do this again next week. And I hope you have a wonderful, restful weekend, and that you have a time, maybe even starting tomorrow night with Shabbat, to really think about your home and think about how you want this Shabbat, but also as we're moving into the high holiday season, what does home mean to you? What are the lessons you want to be taking from your past homes, and how can you make sure that you are making sure the home is your center? And then how can you take those lessons and start to bring them out into the world and share them with others? So thank you all very much, and see you soon.